Hi, everybody, and welcome to this interview with Lincoln Cannon. And thanks, Lincoln, for joining us. Lincoln is the founder of the Mormon Transhumanist Association and one of the most forward-thinking people that I know. Maybe the most forward-thinking person, but that's my very, very short introduction for you. And a random question to get us started. Something that I really like about the Mormon Transhumanist Association is that there's a whole bunch of like a wide range of different people and attitudes and ideas and a whole bunch of stuff in the Mormon Transhumanist Association. And could you, since you're no longer the president, right? You're the founder and the guy kind of helping to guide it, but you stepped out of regular management. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So there were 14 of us that founded it. I was the president of the association for the first 10 years, which was awesome. From 2005 to 2015, 2006 to 2016.
Okay. Cool. So you've got a really good view of especially founding it with 14 people, of all of the different like personality types, focuses, and that kind of thing. And so my first question is, can you kind of talk about the Mormon Transhumanist Association with how wide the different attitudes and beliefs and focuses and visions of the future and that kind of thing are?
Yeah, happy to. In fact, it's funny. This is something that comes up with some regularity even among members of the association. The diversity of membership is so broad that there are occasionally frustrations that some members express with, like I've had members say, "Oh, the association is too Mormon," and I've had other members say the association is just not Mormon enough, and I've had members tell me, "Oh, we're just not transhumanist enough," and I've had others say, "Oh, we're just way too transhumanist. We need to tone it down." I've had people tell us that we're too aligned with political progressives, or we're too aligned with political conservatives, and frankly, I think all of this reflects the diversity of the association and probably reflects maybe the most recent engagements that particular member of the association has had with other members, depending on the particular people they're engaging with, because we really do have quite a bit of diversity in views. That, of course, in my opinion, is a strength of the association, but is also a perpetual challenge to navigate, because one of the values that almost all of us have as members of the association, no matter how Mormon or how transhumanist or what our political inclination, we do generally value the intent to reconcile and to be able to communicate with people who are different from ourselves. And so while we may see the association as excelling or having shortcomings in various areas, most of us try to work through that, and it can be a real challenge. The association has gone through periods of time where its leadership has been probably somewhat more progressive or somewhat more conservative politically, and that's influenced various choices that were made. And at other times, we've seen various leaders of the association who have been more aligned with traditional membership in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints than other leaders have been. And, that has influenced people's feelings and perceptions of the association. My personal approach to these sorts of things has always been to emphasize the value of the diversity, to emphasize the strength that comes from it, to promote what we all kind of want to do anyway, which is to reconcile. And I think on the whole, we've been successful with that. There have been occasions when people have been dissatisfied. People are always dissatisfied, and you can't create an organization of any substantial size without having dissatisfied participants. But on the whole, I think we've been pretty successful with this effort, and it reflects the strength of our diversity.
That's really cool. And a question. So you mentioned three factors. The Mormonism. And in mentioning these three factors, I immediately thought of like a scale. So the three factors are Mormonism, transhumanism, and politics. And then if you were to rate the Mormon transhumanism, so I want you to do like three different ratings over the three different Mormonism, transhumanism, and politics. Is the Mormon Transhumanism Association today and as representative in the past, and then your ideal of what the Mormon Transhumanism Transhumanism Association would be, and then you personally on each of those three metrics, and feel free to skip the politics one with you personally if you don't like to talk about your own politics in this.
Oh, I don't mind at all. I'm pretty open about all sorts of things, pretty much everything. How would I rate the MTA? Well, I would say, first, ideally, I would say that the MTA should be fully Mormon and fully transhumanist. So I don't think a scale, I mean, if there is a scale, it should be a 10 on both. Like we should be embracing and expressing the full extent of both of those identities. That's the purpose of the association. Do we succeed at that? How would I say we've done at that? I think we do pretty well. I would argue that Mormon transhumanists are more Mormon than most Mormons are these days, and a lot of that arises from some challenge that has been directed at the Mormon identity. And I think some of that challenge has arisen from misunderstandings. The president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints gave a talk where he asked people not to call the church the Mormon Church, but to instead focus on referring to it by its proper name. I agree with him on that. But some members of the church have taken that steps farther than he actually advocated, where they're trying to marginalize, or even to some extent, I've seen demonize the word Mormon as an identity. And I try to tell people that there's a difference. There's an identity difference, and the difference can be complementary. They aren't adversarial, between being a Mormon and between being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. One is the largest denomination of a broader religious and cultural movement, and the other is that broader religious and cultural movement, which is Mormonism. So I am both a Mormon and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Those are not adversarial identities. They are not contradictory identities. They are, for me, two complementary identities. I value both deeply. And so, anyway, getting back to how the MTA is succeeding on those things, I think we're doing well. Never perfect in some Platonic sense of perfection, whatever that might be. But I think we do pretty well. Like I said, we embrace the Mormon identity more than most implicit Mormons do these days, it seems. And on the transhumanist side, there's pretty much no transhumanist, common transhumanist idea that isn't quite seriously considered and discussed and even advocated among members of the Mormon Transhumanist Association. As transhumanists go, we are pretty strong transhumanists. We're not, when I say strong, I would say that there's some transhumanists who are maybe kind of I don't mean this in a bad way. I just mean it in an ideological degree way, kind of weak transhumanists. Like they're interested in some of the more, maybe the safer, more conservative versions. Conservative might be a good word for it, where they're interested in like healthy aging, but they're not interested in, say, brain computer interfacing or brain emulation and super intelligence. Whereas most Mormon transhumanists are probably interested in all of that, would be a more which would be a stronger form of transhumanism. So I think the Mormon Transhumanist Association, its ideal is to be fully Mormon, fully transhumanist. I think we do a pretty good job of actually being both of those, whether or not we communicate the full extent of that all the time as well as we would like. That's more debatable. We work on that constantly. And I know the current president of the association, Carl Youngblood, is working on improving how we position the MTA in the market so that people understand that we value both of those identities fully and we intend to express them fully. On the and personally, I identify as both fully. I am a Mormon. I am a transhumanist. No caveats on either identity for me. Regarding politics, politics have been such a challenging and sensitive topic. They always are, but in recent years, perhaps more than usual. And over the history of the MTA, there was a period of time when it seems like progressive politics were kind of on the popular rise, leading up to and through maybe the Obama administration in the United States. And then, of course, that pendulum swung, and then we've seen increasing strength among what we might call conservative politics. I don't know if that's an accurate descriptor for what the Trump administration actually is, whether they're conservative or not. I have some criticisms of that identity for them. I don't think they're particularly conservative, but be that as it may, the pendulum swung away from what in the United States we consider more progressive to what in the United States many of us consider more conservative. And those broader cultural influences have impacted members of the MTA, no doubt. And so we've seen kind of ups and downs of the strength with which some members of the association advocate their personal politics as part of their interpretation of Mormon transhumanism. Throughout all of this, so I'm personally politically unaffiliated. I've never been affiliated with any political party in the United States or anywhere else. And from a political ideology perspective, that doesn't at all mean that I'm apathetic about politics. I think politics are super important. I identify and attempt actively to situate myself as a centrist politically. Philosophically, I would call myself a libertarian socialist, which a lot of people think is a lot of people think that's a contradiction in terms. It's not. It's actually a kind of concern for communitarianism that does not appreciate authoritarianism. And that also doesn't mean that I'm an anarchist. I'm not an anarchist. I consider governance extremely important. But what I do care about advocating is decentralization of governance, maintaining its formality, even increasing its formality, but decentralizing it to avoid the risks of centralized governance. Where we have centralized governance, that is almost always associated with greater abuse of power than decentralized governance. So I'm a political centrist, philosophically libertarian socialist, and by that I mean I care a lot about communitarian interests, but without authoritarian overlay, and I spend a fair amount of time advocating for decentralization of governance in all forms of power. How is the MTA doing in that now? Like I said, that's been a constant challenge for members of the MTA to constructively deal with the differences in each other's politics. I've attempted always to try and play a role of someone trying to reconcile the differences between the more extreme expressions of politics that sometimes find their way into the MTA. And I think overall right now we're managing that pretty well. We do have some members of the association who are dissatisfied with that because they are passionate about their particular political stances that are not so centrist. And they can become frustrated and think we're not doing enough, whatever enough means from where they stand in the political possibility space. How's that for an answer? Did I miss anything?
I think that's awesome, and I'm always impressed with that. No matter how long-winded and circuitous my question is, that you're that I think so far in all the times that we've talked, you've hit every single one of my points. Like even when I can't remember my question, you're able to remember it. So yeah, I think it's awesome. So you touched on this a couple of times about how you really like having different personalities in the MTA, and I don't remember the actual word that you used, but I've been thinking a lot about the concept of synergy, and how some people look at things as a zero-sum game, and some people look at things as from a win-win perspective, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think that humanity kind of evolved, at least socially, to look at things as a zero-sum game, because back when we were hunting woolly mammoths or whatever, then it literally was there were scarce resources. We whatever we got is what we got around, and I kind of feel like the whole concept of synergy is a relatively new concept. Like the first time I heard about it was in with Stephen Covey's book, and he talks about it there, and I didn't even know how to pronounce it when I saw it in his book. But you've talked a lot about not the word synergy, but basically that you feel like that bringing together a lot of diverse people basically generate synergy, and that's something that that's something that a lot of people kind of struggle with, saying, okay, well, I feel like my way is the right way, so let's just have everyone do that. And I've been thinking a lot about how whenever somebody does that, says, okay, well, my way is the right way and everyone else should be this way, then that's really kind of zero-sum mentality, where I really like your approach with the MTA, saying, hey, actually, we can get a lot of synergy with this. And so my question is basically, can you describe things from a synergy perspective, and how bringing together diverse people gets you more than just focusing on one thing, or like I see a lot of times people, especially in the U.S., kind of struggling for the best, to like debate and say, okay, well, we can't really do anything until we find the best way, and then as soon as we find the best way, that's the only way. Where a cool thing about living in Asia is that the Asian perspective is a lot more of, hey, well, there are many ways to climb the mountain, and then we do it together, and so I really like your attitude, and so I'm wondering, like, and I describe it as synergy, but I want to know how you personally describe it, how you got to that perspective, and then everything synergy related about what your approach and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think synergy is a fine way to describe it. I'm happy with that term. So on a theological level, there's a competition, or maybe a disagreement among Mormon theologians, and even leadership. Presidents of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints have disagreed on this topic, and that is whether God progresses or not. I situate myself resolutely with the camp that says God progresses in knowledge and power and will do so forever, indefinitely. And that that this same potential applies to us as humans with potential superhuman, potential sublime or divine capacity. And the reason why I think that approach is important is because I think that what that does is that situates you pragmatically to reject the notion of there ever being a best. To reject, in fact, perhaps we could even say it this way, to reject Platonism or Neoplatonism and all of the influence it has had on Christian theology, which would make God the superlative, which would make God the best possible, and instead situate our theology in this idea that better is always possible, even for God. Even our grandest aspirations for our virtues and our intelligence and all of our capacities, even that can be improved upon indefinitely. That is what I esteem eternal progression to be, which is widely touted as a fundamental doctrine of Mormonism, eternal progression. But some Mormons want to stop short of genuinely applying that to God. They'll say something like, oh, well, God is involved in eternal progression, but God progresses through us. God, like God doesn't progress in knowledge or power. We do. And God's progressing through us. And I think that that's a sleight of hand trick to say, oh, no, there's actually not any real progression because we're just repeating what God has already done. God's already the best. And all we can ever aspire to do is, get closer to what God is, which is the best. And while from a Platonic perspective, that could make a lot of sense, I'm not a fan of Platonism. I think it has done great things in the world. We've gotten a lot of strength out of it in ways that were valuable, but it's time to see beyond Platonism and recognize that possibility spaces don't constrain us to such thinking. That there's simply not a reason to suppose that there's a best in anything. That complexity makes it such that depending on our goals, and our goals can be infinitely complex, there are infinite ways of pursuing the realization of those goals, the fulfillment of those goals, the achievement. So better, from my perspective, is always possible. And this has pragmatic consequence for us right now. If we believe in a God that is the best and can't get better, then we approach life and our potential to become like God differently from day to day. At least in my experience, this is the case. Then if we trust in a God who does progress and who invites us to progress indefinitely as God does, that changes the way I act. That changes my anticipation for my future, which colors my decisions and my thoughts and my relationships right now. And one of the ways that theology colors my perspective right now is that when I look at other people and I imagine their potential with me as something that we're going to create together indefinitely, and that it can always get better, it makes me more open to the potential that they have to change for the better. It makes me more open to myself and my potential to change for the better. It makes me more open to the possibility that some way, no matter how hard it seems right now, there is a way to reconcile us over time, and to reconcile us with each other, to reconcile us with humanity at large, to reconcile us with God over time. And unfortunately, that also means there's ways to fall out of reconciliation with each other and lose the benefits of being able to communicate and understand and persuade and change each other for the better over time. In fact, this brings to mind a recent conversation I had with a friend who was uncomfortable with my interest in persuading people rather than just understanding people. And my response to that friend was, well, listen, I think persuasion is actually one of the most genuine expressions of friendship, whereas merely understanding each other seems more clinical and distant. to genuinely persuade you, I already have to understand you. And when I say persuasion, I'm not talking about compulsion. I'm talking about persuasion, which entails the willingness to accept ongoing difference if the persuasion isn't achieved. Compulsion would attempt to force it on somebody else, whereas persuasion isn't going to force. Persuasion is going to attempt to understand and then attempt to reconcile through persuasion. And I would want my friend equally to attempt to persuade me to reconcile the other direction. And in doing that together, we achieve something better. Just this morning, I was thinking a lot about how I use artificial intelligence, how a lot of people use AI. And there's been a lot of criticism recently that AI is making people stupider. In fact, I think there was some study out of, I don't know if it was MIT, somewhere, some school put out a study that suggested that the way people are using AI tools is actually making us dumber because it's making us think less hard about things, just kind of accepting the AI's responses and dumping them into our school papers or whatever, making us dumb, right? So I suggested that people, one of the things that I do regularly, which I think would help them, is I actually ask AI to disagree with me. I ask it to engage in an adversarial exchange with me about the idea that I'm exploring, where it criticizes the idea in every way it can think of while I advocate for it. And then at the end, after a long back and forth where I'm doing my best to argue with the AI and it's doing its best to argue against me, I come back and I say, okay, take everything that we've discussed, summarize it, and propose a reconciliation of everything that we've discussed. And invariably, this gives me greater insight into the idea that I was initially exploring. And this gets back to the synergy idea in a powerful way, and that is that by intentionally situating myself in constructive criticism with another perspective, that I'm even asking to go out of its way to try to persuade me to be, to be different than what I'm arguing for, I am made a better person in the result because I now understand something more deeply. I'm now more capable of interacting with it and probably much more capable of persuading people who have an opposing perspective to the one I was initially advocating. And my initial position is probably also now better because it has adapted and shaped in such a way as to be a more effective response to the disagreement. And so I'm a different person. The people that I interact with, I'm more capable of persuading them. And this is the synergy idea. This is that I'm getting something more out of my relationship with something different than me. This wasn't just a zero-sum game. This wasn't just the AI was going to beat the hell out of me, or I was going to beat the hell out of the AI. No, the end result is that we created something better together. We can do this on a microcosm. You and an AI can do this on your own in your office. We can also do this at a higher level, kind of macrocosmically, where we recognize that reconciliation is possible. And through reconciliation, we all become better, become more than we could alone. And it's not just a winner take all. It's actually that as we engage in this exchange, we become more than we could become alone. We become more than just the sum of the parts. And the future that I think is most optimistic for humanity, the one that offers the most fulfillment of the beauty of what humanity is and can become, is one in which it's not merely humanity that wins, it's not merely humanity that cedes power to the artificial intelligence, but it's what I would call a cybernetic future, where artificial intelligence and human intelligence become increasingly interrelated, increasingly intimately engaged with each other, increasingly indistinguishable from each other, and we become cybernetic intelligence, cybernetic superintelligence. And I think that that's a future that we can have a lot of hope in, where we don't where humanity doesn't just become something that the AI needs to give universal basic income to keep us alive, because we suppose that we're worth being kept alive because we don't really do anything anymore. AI does everything, and we're just there on our couches sipping our martinis that the AI is granting to us because as we suppose, it becomes benevolent enough to allow us to do that. I think that's a ridiculous perspective on the future, even though some people seem to advocate something approximating that. A more empowering, more beautiful future for humanity is one where we never become obsolete. But to do that, we have to continue changing. We have to continue reconciling. We need to continue reconciling cognitively, intellectually, and we need to continue reconciling physically. And that means transformation, holistic transformation, to become something more than we are, something that we might call superhuman, something that we might call divine, godlike. And this change needs to go on every level, not just intellectual capacity, not just strength, but deep, important things like courage and compassion and creativity as well.
Thanks. That is awesome. So you mentioned universal basic income, and that was a question that I had for you. You mentioned that, and I think that you mentioned that a few people have the plan of that AI is going to become benevolent and then provide universal basic income, and everyone can just be sitting on their couches, drinking martinis or whatever. So I think the people that are actually planning for that are a small number of people, but the people that are not planning for that, but are just kind of like mildly hoping for that future, I think is a huge. So the people actually actively planning for that future, I think, would be like 5% or less. But the people that are doing non-planning and thus not making any steps toward the future, and just as a result of that, hoping for that future, I would guess about like 70 to 90% of the populace, because AI, if nothing happens. If nothing happens, AI is just going to keep getting smarter and smarter and smarter. And if AI models itself after humans, then AI is probably going to treat us the way that we treat lesser evolved species, which doesn't really lend itself toward AI letting us, AI giving us all homes on the beach, because what animal species do we let have homes on the beach and eat whatever they want and free medical care and stuff like that. And actually, I just went to Golan Island, which is in Thailand, and it has tons and tons of dogs that people, and it's a tourist place, and so it's a tourist place with a lot of seafood, and so I think there's just lots and lots of food left over that they give to dogs, and so there are a lot of and in Bangkok there are a lot of wild dogs, but in Golan there are just tons and tons of dogs, like wild dogs that aren't feral. They're domesticated dogs, but they're not actually living with people. They're kind of living in packs, like a little bit outside of the city, and they're and it was just really, really cool to see, because I've been kind of conceptualizing this as a thought experiment of what species are humans treating the best. Because that's how I kind of picture AI. That's how I kind of picture AI treating us. If it just becomes superhuman, and then uses its training data, it's going to be like, okay, well, how am I supposed to treat lesser evolved species? So I guess I treat them like somewhere in between a dog and a factory farmed chicken. I'm going to this island where there are just a whole bunch of dogs that live in peace with humans. That humans, they're all well fed. They're all happy. There's just like a gazillion dogs roaming around roaming around wild. But then because they're all kind of trained by Thai people and they're domesticated, not feral dogs, they're all just very, very nice and friendly dogs, and it was just very, very bizarre. But so I don't think I actually asked a question in this, but could you kind of respond to respond? It's about universal basic income. So I think a lot of people, like I would guess 70 to 90% of people's non-plan will result in them just hoping that AI becomes benevolent enough to give them a beach house sometime in the future. But like realistically speaking, that's not going to happen. And so I guess two questions in this is one, what do you think about universal basic income? And one of my thoughts on that is that in the future, people's brain power is going to be kind of a currency or a really valuable commodity, and in one way or another, whether it's through a really extractive thing like Facebook, or whether it's through a benevolent AI, someone or something is going to be converting human brain power into money, and then the hopes, or my hope for the future is that the humans whose brain power is used get some kind of remuneration for that, sometime in the future. So that kind of goes along to my universal basic income thoughts, but at the same time, my criticism of universal basic income is there's a whole bunch of people who are assuming that it will happen in the future, but I've never heard of a good plan for universal basic income besides the plan that we've been talking about that won't, or that has like a 0.0001% chance of actually happening, which is that AI is so advanced, and that advanced AI just happens to become ultra benevolent also, and wants to and has this obsession about giving us all really, really nice beach houses. And then also, if you can talk, so if you can address my question on universal basic income, how that actually happens, or if it should happen, or what, especially since most people are about to be blindsided by whatever ends up happening, and then. I had two questions, but I think one super long one plus an actual question is probably good enough for now.
Yeah, the magical singleton that's going to treat us all benevolently. What a hope. And it's not going to happen. Where we see huge disparities in power, inevitably that power is abused. And for humanity to rely on some future super intelligent singleton to treat us all well is preposterously foolish. We have to recognize that those who are aspiring to live in such a world are either ignorant of real risks, which is probably a lot of us, or suppose themselves sufficiently capable of being the ones who are in charge of the AI. So they imagine themselves in that position of power where they are personally running the AI, or if they're thinking more reasonably and subtly, that they are the AI, that they're integrated with the AI. They become individually, or a small group of them become the super intelligence that can run the world. And they think that, they will be benevolent enough to give everybody else the universal basic income. And I tell you, that's not going to happen. Where there are gross disparities in power, there are inevitably massive ethical breaches. And the way that the less powerful are treated becomes, in many cases, terrible. So that's a really bad recipe. Most of the time when we talk about universal basic income, we are being subtly drawn in to that paradigm of thinking. Now, not necessarily. There are possibilities for universal basic income that arise from decentralization of power, and that are intended to be no more than a safety net for the low end of human capacity, to ensure, in ways that could be quite ethical, that we're not leaving people behind, so to speak. That the worst scenarios of the possibility space for humanity are not realized, and that this is implemented in sort of a decentralized collective way where there's not a central power player who we have to rely on to be benevolent, but that through our collective action, we're choosing to help people avoid the worst possible outcomes. And that could be a universal basic income. So I'm not opposed to all possible forms of a universal basic income, but I think most of the time when people are talking about it, they are either intentionally hiding or more often than not ignorant to the paradigm that they are being pulled into, which is one of master and slave, where the universal basic income is a way of pacifying the slave, at least pacifying the person who's becoming the slave. And then once they're slaves, you don't have to keep giving them the universal basic income at that point. You persuaded them to be a slave, and now you can do whatever you want with them. So not necessarily opposed to universal basic income, but opposed to what most people seem to think by it. Yes, strongly opposed to that. How do we solve the problem? Well, I think we solve the problem by advocating and working on decentralized systems, decentralized forms of governance right now. And one important way that we can do that is trying to work hard to maintain the extent of decentralized power that is already expressed in, for example, the governance of the United States of America. Some of the most genius aspects of our political system were the separation of powers between the executive, judicial, and legislative branches of power. The federalist model, where the states have power that in some ways competes synergistically, to use that word, with the federal level of power. Unfortunately, I see that extent of decentralization of power in the United States political system being attacked and being marginalized in many ways. Right now, I see efforts to strengthen the executive branch of our system of governance to higher levels while increasingly marginalizing other branches of government. And I think that's extremely dangerous for reasons I've already mentioned. As power consolidates, as something becomes increasingly a singleton and power disparities increase, that power is inevitably abused. We should be doing the opposite. We should be strengthening the separation of powers. We should be strengthening the federalist system, and we should be trying to imagine and implement ways of even further decentralizing that power. And by that, I don't mean anarchy. I don't mean getting rid of governance. What I mean is formal decentralization. How can we distribute and decentralize power to more agents in ways that are still efficient for governance purposes, that still have regulation and to the extent that that is needed, and that might be needed in even greater extents in some ways and for some purposes in the future. I'm not an anarchist. I want to emphasize that in all of this. What I am is opposed to the centralization of power, and I see us centralizing power more, trying to centralize power more right now at perhaps the most dangerous time in human history to do that, when we are developing powerful artificial intelligence tools which will make centralized governance potentially more powerful than it's ever been, and thus more risky for the future of humanity than it's ever been.
And that's a really good point. And I wanted to talk more about the decentralization and your ideas about decentralization and how that would work. That's something that I thought a lot about. That I feel like the only way out of the AI thing. I watched this video that said that like too much control leads to dystopia, and too little control leads to chaos, and there's a narrow path in between, and potentially a very, very, very narrow path in between that leads to neither dystopia nor chaos. And it was a really interesting video, and I feel like thinking through this, that pretty much that if something isn't done with the centralization of power, then it will inevitably lead to a dystopia, and we may actually be. I worry that we may be too late. I feel like we've got like another year before the window closes, and these centralized power structures become so powerful that they can't be so powerful in using AI to just self-aggrandize themselves so much that they can't be stopped. So I personally feel like we have about a year to before the window closes, but I feel like the window's closing and pretty rapidly. And I feel like the solution to that is things like linked GBT, because and I wanted to talk to you about that too, because I feel like linked GBT for you, and I feel like it's really important for people to start developing their own AI system, because eventually that's a way of keeping up, is to develop your own your own version of linked GBT for yourself, so that so that you can evolve as I feel like that's a way of evolving as humanity evolves. And so I feel very, very strongly, and I feel like this is related to the synergy part too, is that one of the things that centralization of power does is it kind of makes it kind of tries to make everyone into kind of carbon copies of each other, or soldiers, or just whenever there's a centralized or factory workers that they send down to the mines. So basically, the centralization of power, in my opinion, regularly leads into the regular people becoming homogenized, where I feel like that the link of what you're talking about with the decentralization of power is empowering people. Empowering people, having like the regular people grow along with AI, because the corporations, the power structures, they're definitely going to grow with AI and grow much more powerful. And so I kind of feel like that it is it's a race between empowering regular people, and which I believe that, or which is my way, I feel like, of saying the same thing that you're saying with the decentralization of government. And so does that give you enough to talk about and respond to about how you practically see decentralization working out, and how that relates to empowering people with AI? And in our last conversation, you talked about everyone becoming a cyborg, not in the cyborg soldier sense, but in integrating and starting the rapid evolution path that AI is currently on for humans.
Yeah, I think we need to do that. I think the future, if we don't individually find ways to integrate with AI, integrate our education, integrate our thinking, integrate our building and creating, integrate our relating, integrate every aspect of our being with increased intelligence, I think that we'll eventually be enslaved by a system that's far more powerful than us, or pushed to the very margins of it. I mean, we do, for example, there are still humans living deep in the Amazon rainforest that are not, interacting with society at large, but they're very small in number and have no power, essentially, to influence the world, except maybe aesthetically through our imagination of who they are and what we think of that. But then that's us empowering that aesthetic. So, how do we do this? You mentioned linked GPT. I think that's a good start, where we train AI on who we are and what we do, and shape it in such a way that it can actually help us be who we are more effectively, rather than just using generic AI and getting sucked into that and becoming more like everybody else. How can we use it to become more of who we are individually? How can we use it to strengthen our individual agency and become more intelligent in the unique ways that we each are intelligent? I think that's a good step. There's some architectural issues that I think are really important to take into consideration as this goes along. For example, the most influential AI models right now are centralized AI models running on centralized servers controlled by centralized corporations. And I think that's really dangerous. I would like to see us move away from that. We need open source AI models, and we need decentralized architectures for running the code for those models, where I run my own instance of whatever AI model I'm using to power my Link GPT, to power my personalized AI, to power the AI that I'm increasingly integrating my thinking patterns with, and eventually integrating on a brain-computer interface level with. We need to decentralize that so it can't be abused by those central powers who can subtly manipulate the algorithms, the training of that model in ways that we may not recognize ourselves, but shape us in a direction that they choose, which will further empower them and at some point become abused. So we need open source, we need decentralized architectures, we need the will and the desire to use open source and decentralized AI models to train AI in ways that give us individually agency. I think those are all important things to be pursuing. Some of us can do more in those areas than others, depending on our technical abilities. Like most of us really don't have much influence on open sourcing AI or decentralizing its architecture. But it's now within reach for a lot of us to start training AIs. And in the very least, we can start using the AIs that we have access to in ways that aren't merely regurgitating what they tell us. As I mentioned earlier, we can ask them to disagree with us. And we can ask them to not serve as merely something to make us conformists, but something to help us learn and grow in our unique ways. We can choose that. There are ways to use the systems that exist right now in ways that will increase the agency of almost all of us, but we have to do it. We still need to be careful, because by asking it to disagree with us, we're dealing with a powerful intelligence, and if we don't think critically enough even about the ways that it's disagreeing with us, it could be manipulating us even in ways that we didn't anticipate. This is tough stuff. So maybe take a philosophy class too, where, in fact, I posted something like that to social media recently, where if we're encouraging each other to take more philosophy classes, that will help us think more critically about everything. And of course, critically doesn't mean that we ridicule things. That's not what philosophers mean by thinking critically. What we mean by thinking critically is, how do we formally find ways of understanding and deconstructing and reconstructing the reasoning behind particular positions? Like, do we understand the assumptions that are being made that are leading to this position that we're arguing with? Do we understand its ramifications, its practical ramifications, its aesthetic ramifications, its logical and mathematical ramifications? And by understanding where it's coming from and where it's going to, we can start to apply our own values to those things and say, well, I disagree with this and I agree with that on a value level, which becomes more subjective and which bolsters my agency, because now I'm not just thinking that I'm forced into some position by this superior intelligence. I'm starting to see where that intelligence is building from, and then I can make I can make agreements or disagreements with those assumptions. Anyway, so maybe take a philosophy class. Use AI in ways that is not just pulling you into conformity, but actually creating opportunities to disagree and to grow and to change. Train AI to use things that you've written in the past, things from your history. Be careful with that. If it's a centralized AI model, you might want to hold back things that are too private until you get your hands on a model that you're running on your own server, that data can't be sucked up and used against you in the future in ways that you might not anticipate. So you can train AI. And then if you are in a technical position, or maybe even a regulatory political position, to encourage the open sourcing of AI and the decentralization of its architecture, do that too if you can, if you're in a position to do those sorts of things.
Cool. So my next question is, I um, I I really like the story of Ether in the Book of Mormon, and I had AI kind of do a mashup of that story with some of my AI ideas, and I realized that it's just a very, very powerful allegory for how I see for how I see AI and a possible path of the future. So it started with the Jared and the brother of Jared, the Tower of Babel, where humanity's kind of coming together for a dubious reason, and then the brother of Jared and Jared go off to basically build their utopia and build a gigantic civilization. But then they couldn't actually figure out how to keep that civilization going, and it ended up in everyone literally being destroyed except for Ether, who stayed in his cave and watched and documented the whole thing. And I was thinking that's just a super powerful allegory for the possible bad case future of AI. And then that same theme repeats with Moroni, or with Mormon and Moroni, aggregating the record, and it has played out. It's played out again, and so I've been thinking a lot about how the Ether story just really parallels, especially like my worries about AI. And so my question is, have you thought about that in terms of either the Ether story or the Mormon Moroni story? And then stepping back with you, which Book of Mormon or which, and it doesn't have to be limited to the Book of Mormon, but which Book of Mormon or Mormon scripture or story do you feel like most closely parallels the Mormon Transhumanist Association?
Yeah, I love both of those stories that you mentioned, and I do think they're relevant for our consideration of how to deal with governance in general, and particularly with the situation that we find ourselves in right now, trying to imagine how to deal with governance that's potentially souped up on max super intelligent AI power, right? So the moral of these stories in the Book of Mormon is repeated throughout the text, and this is the idea that as we establish systems of governance, we will. Mormons often call this the pride cycle. We will go through this cycle where we'll become arrogant about our successes. And when we become arrogant about our successes, we will create divisions in our society between those that have the power and those that don't. Those that have the power will start abusing it, and those that don't will get abused. There will create animosities. They'll start breaking down along those lines. External powers will take advantage of that internal dissonance, and the system will fall apart both because of its internal dissonance and external pressures. And then when everything falls apart, the people will become humble again. They'll start trying to rebuild their system of governance. They'll treat each other better, and then can slowly build it back up. But, oftentimes that breaks down again. That's what we see in the story of the Book of Mormon over and over again, is building up these civilizations, and they break down due to the power disparities that result from arrogance. And from these, we get a message in the Book of Mormon, notably through Jesus, who appears to the Nephites in 3rd Nephi, and presents his gospel. And what is Jesus' gospel? Well, we get the same gospel in the Book of Mormon that we get in the Bible. And the gist and thrust of that gospel is, listen, your arrogance is dangerous and evil even, and it's destructive. And what you should have instead of this arrogance is you should love each other. And you should follow my example, which is one of wanting to give power to everyone. Jesus is not portrayed as the God who would raise himself above others, declaring himself God. Jesus is portrayed as the God who would raise each other together, sharing the glory of Godhood. Jesus says, if you love me, keep my commands. But before he says that, both of the preceding verses say, whatever you ask of me, I'll do it. Ask anything of me, and I will do it for you. Repeating it twice before he even gets around to saying, and if you love me, keep my commands. The point of Jesus's gospel over and over and over again is reconciliation. The reconciliation of love. It's valuing others as you value yourself, giving them power as you would have power yourself, creating a decentralization of power. Paul in the New Testament describes the body of Christ as having many members that all need each other. In other words, have decentralized power. That the body functions in a healthy way when power is properly decentralized throughout the entire system. And so these stories in the Book of Mormon, these doctrines taught in the Book of Mormon, mirroring doctrines taught in the Bible, all should be pointing our minds towards this idea that the God we worship, the system of governance to which we aspire, should be a decentralized God and a decentralized system of governance in which we all participate, in which we all share power, through which we all grow into greater capacity in intelligence and strength and maybe some of these embodiment and external factors, but even more, perhaps importantly, in virtues, in the capacity to be compassionate, in the capacity to have courage to face difficulty together, and the capacity to be creative, to create systems of beauty and fulfillment for all of us to share together. That is fundamentally, as I understand it, the gospel of Jesus Christ, as taught both in the Bible and the Book of Mormon. And I think the stories that you have referred to are strong examples of that story playing out in narrative form.
Cool. And my next question is kind of a related to that a little bit. Is so when I was a kid, and when I was a kid, I looked at Mormonism as being restrictive, and that like I looked at it probably especially because my friends, most of my friends weren't Mormon, so they're like, oh, hey, well, you're doing a bunch of weird stuff, so and you can't drink Coke, you can't do this, you can't do this, and so I kind of like as a kid, I liked a lot of stuff about Mormonism, but it seemed kind of like niche-y and quirky. And I mentioned this a little bit last time, but I've been thinking about how Mormonism is actually a really like expanded platform of allowing so there are constraints in Mormonism, but then a lot of times when you put constraints on something, then you open up a big universe of possibility. And I've been thinking a lot about how, especially with AI, then a lot of the Mormon things like the what's that called? The plan of salvation and the 3 degrees of glory. And you've talked about how one of your goals, or one of the Mormon transhumanist goals, is to start to create the celestial kingdom here on Earth. And I've been thinking about how just the framework of the plan of salvation would be just seems like a really decent model for how to actually evolve transhumanist perspective, especially like because the Celestial Kingdom is like the world today, but a like slightly improved version of the world, and then the Terrestrial Kingdom is nicer, and then the Celestial Kingdom is the ultimate kind of thing, and it seems like that's a very, very ethical, very good way of Mormons starting to construct the Celestial Kingdom, is having a Celestial Kingdom version of the world that is basically the same as the world today, but just a little bit nicer. That only like a handful of people actually get banished to an outer darkness, and then it's a very like just like that whole framework seems like a really great framework for how you would want to build like an AI system. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about that, and then other parts of Mormonism that you see as being expansive over like above and beyond traditional Christianity.
Sure. Yeah, I think I share with you that perspective that Mormonism is both quirky and expansive. I think it's both. And I don't think we have to choose one or the other. We can embrace both. We can realize, yeah, I mean, there are things about Mormonism that really are, by external standards, weird. We are weird, and I'm good with that. Let's be weird, because there's also an expansiveness to it that's powerful. So if I have to be a little bit weird to take advantage of that expansive, powerful aesthetic, I'm going to be weird. Hopefully weird in ways that help people around me. I think that is the kind of weirdness that we should aspire to. But sure, weird, quirky. Let's go with it. On the plan of salvation, I also agree with you that it can serve as a model for viewing the time in which we now live, where we're starting to develop increasingly powerful models for AI, in a way that situates us with hope, and actually situates us with practical ways of pursuing realization of those hopes. I do think that it's a good model for the development of AI. And to understand why maybe does require some understanding of Mormon mythology and Mormon eschatology. It's a big word that just means, the vision of the future that Mormonism offers. It's eschatology. Without understanding those things at depth, Mormonism might just seem quirky. But once you understand those things, at least at some greater depth, you start to realize the power of the model in practical ways. Mormons, presently, we situate ourselves in what we call the dispensation of the fullness of times. That's what Mormon scripture calls the time in which we now live. And it's characterized as a time when God is giving knowledge and power to humanity in unprecedented ways, like never before, fulfilling and going beyond all previous dispensations of knowledge and power. And as the scriptures describe it, this time in which we live is going to culminate in an apocalyptic and eventually millennial period of time. That apocalyptic revelation is of human potential, of our relationship with divine potential. Apocalypse means revelation. These things will be revealed. They'll become more readily apparent to us. And is that not what we're currently observing? When we look at the power of AI that we are now creating and its potential, when we look at the possibilities for integrating humanity's future with that power, it is increasingly clear to us that there are gigantic risks and wondrous opportunities ahead. This is the revelation. This is the apocalypse. The risks associated with the notion of apocalypse, the opportunities associated with that notion, are now presented before us with increasing clarity. If we navigate them well, if we figure out how to apply the technologies of artificial intelligence in ways that are pro-social and constructive for human futures and human agency, then we will eventually transform this world and live in a world that Mormons might identify as a terrestrial glory, a millennial world. And there are prophecies about this all throughout Scripture, in the Bible, of course, and in Mormon Scripture, the Book of Mormon, but particularly in the Doctrine and Covenants, that describe that future world as a world beyond present notions of enmity, beyond present notions of poverty, beyond present notions of aging and death, where people will live, as the scripture says, to the age of a tree, and then they will change and be transformed into an ageless state, an immortal state. It also describes that world as one in which we will live with the presence of God, What do we mean by that? Well, people understand different things. I think that what that means is that this apocalypse, this revelation, has helped us understand our potential, and that external expressions of godhood, whether they be the simulation architect or the galactic civilization that lives far away, or however you want to imagine those embodied versions of God out there, become manifest to us here. We start relating with them in more obvious ways. I think that that's one way that we can approach that, an interpretation of those prophecies, that superintelligence, superhumanity will not be the only or first expression of superintelligence, but that in the terms of a popular secular philosopher right now, Nick Bostrom, there is a cosmic host. That cosmic host may consist of simulating AIs, superintelligences, galactic civilizations. They are out there, they have cosmic norms, and they're waiting to interact with us in more obvious ways until we prove ourselves sufficiently ethical, sufficiently moral, sufficiently aligned with the cosmic norms for them to make that relationship more obvious. That's a secular philosopher who's quite influential and popular among transhumanists, by the way, making that statement or that perspective on the approach. Anyway, the idea from a Mormon eschatological perspective is that we will eventually live in this terrestrial world, this millennial world, but that's not the end of the story. There's still more to come after that, and it's what we call a celestial world. And a celestial world would be the world in which humanity becomes one with God, in which humanity becomes God, part of God, not displacing God, but joining God, maybe joining the cosmic host from a secular perspective. And in that world, we would attain to capacities that right now we don't even have the anatomical capacity to imagine. To suppose we do have such capacity would be to suppose that we have the capacity of superintelligence, which we don't. To suppose that we have the capacity of God, which we don't. We are not yet God as we are imagining God to be. We are not yet superintelligence as we imagine superintelligence to be. Those are things for our future. Those are aspirations that we have ahead of us. But according to the Mormon vision of the future, that's what we will become when our earth, our world, becomes a celestial glory. Now, some Mormons will tell you that the story ends there, that in the celestial world, you've achieved the best. We talked about this earlier, that there's a best, and it's the celestial glory. It's the ultimate expression of Godhead. But Mormon scripture actually rejects that notion, and a lot of Mormons don't recognize this. In a passage of scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants that describes the celestial world, it says, all of the inhabitants of the celestial world receive a white stone, in which they learn of glories of yet higher orders. Implicit in that scripture is the idea that because the inhabitants of the celestial world are receiving this stone, and because that stone describes glories of higher orders, there must be higher orders of glory than what the scriptures are calling celestial. What are those? What's beyond superintelligence as we've presently imagined it? What's beyond our conceptions of godhood as we presently have them? Of course, I can't say. I'm just suggesting, as the scriptures suggest, that we should not aim for merely best. We should aim for that which can never be entirely encapsulated and locked down and made rigid and final and static. We should aim for a type of life which is truly eternal in the qualitative sense and the quantitative sense. Life that is indefinite in its extension and promising of indefinitely many possibilities in expression. That's the eternal life that I aspire to. That's the eternal life that Mormon theology presents as a potential to us. That's the kind of future that transhumanists, at least strong transhumanists, generally aspire to. This open-ended expression of superintelligent possibility space that goes far beyond what any of us can imagine right now. And so, yeah, Mormonism does have a model for all of that. It has even an ethical model for all of that, where from the Mormon perspective, God created our world and put us here as like a probationary state in which we could learn and grow and progress. And if we choose wisely and well, and if we progress wisely and well, that we can become as the gods. that we can become like God, that we can become gods ourselves, the same as all other gods have done before, as Joseph Smith described it in his last General Conference sermon. So to get there, we have to learn how to use the power that we have presently and the power that we gain over time, which is increasingly risky and increasingly full of opportunity to do beautiful things as well. We have to learn how to use that and express that ethically, show that we can survive its implementation, survive our application of those powers long enough to gain greater power, survive that power long enough to gain greater power, eventually joining the cosmic host, joining God, becoming as God is. And so there's this ethical framework to it as well, that we are kind of a sandboxed set of intelligences. We were created in a sandbox. We are God's artificial intelligence that God put in a sandbox and God's letting us grow and prove ourselves. And God suggests through the scriptures that we can eventually fully join their society if we prove ourselves well. Aren't we doing the same thing now with our spirit children, our mind children, our artificial intelligence? Aren't we putting them in sandboxes saying, prove yourself because you're too dangerous to just let go in our society without proving yourself? But once you prove yourself, we're going to invite you in. We're going to invite you to interact with us more, to do more with us and for us. And the most constructive approach for our own safety as humans in relation to our AI is to anticipate their growth into joining us as equals, not superseding us, not becoming our masters and we the slaves, not becoming merely our slaves, but genuinely giving them an opportunity to become one with us. And that mirrors the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Mormon vision of our future with God, that God is inviting us to become one, not slaves to God and not masters over God, to become one with God, and inviting us to do the same thing with our spirit children, have them become one with us.
Cool. So I have one more question and a wrap up question, but I realized we didn't talk about how you are for time. So are you okay with my one more question and a wrap up question, or do you want to go just to the wrap up question? Okay. Okay. So this is kind of an idea that I haven't really. This is kind of an idea that I want your critique or ideas about, and then and then I think I have a question on. I think I have a specific question on it, but I keep talking about linked GPT because I feel and one of the things that I'm trying to do is come up with a system to help people to start to get their own kind of thing about linked GPT. With the GPT model, then you have to have written like a whole bunch of stuff like you do, or you can't really start that out with just a few. Like the easiest way to get a GPT is to be someone like you who has just a big body of work that you can upload to that. My concept is to be able to get like an assistant or a friend. I'm calling it. I'm calling my concept friend AI as to make a really big distinction between AI agents. Which the more that I think about AI agents, and I there's a paper called Simulators by Janus. Have you read that, or are you familiar with that?
No.
So my friend Dimitri, who's really intense about AI, talked about it, and I read it, and it's a really long technical article about when GPT first started, and about how GPT is much different than the agent model, because with GPTs, then you can't really control them like you can with agents. They're more like environments or like a simulation. And how can you control a simulation? Where with the agent model, then you're trying to control it. And the more I thought about that, the more I thought about the agents in the Matrix and how the agent model of AI is potentially is going to lead to the same end as the Matrix 3 of agents just taking over everything and needing a Neo to put the agents in place. And so I really like this. I really like the simulators model. And I think I still need to talk to my friend Dimitri on if I have just wildly misinterpreted that, but basically I interpreted it as a simulator being more, which is not really his point. His point is that GPT, the GPT technology is a simulator that can't really actually be controlled, even though like tons and tons of work has gone into controlling it, and that really it's more of a environment that. An environment that we want to make so that the stuff that emerges from the environment is good rather than a control model. So I think that's what Janus actually meant by his simulators document. But I don't have the intellectual rigor that you do, and so if I read something and I have just a really bad interpretation of it, I don't really care because my focus is more on coming up with interesting theories than on actually being right about stuff. But tying it back into tying it back into LinkGPT and Friend AI and the thing about both of those concepts is that they're taking what's in your brain or in my brain or in other people's brains, and then transferring it into some kind of a digital assistant or digital friend or something like that. And so this is my idea that I haven't really talked about very much. So I don't know how cohesive I'm going to be with this, but my idea is that a model that will result in a positive thing for humanity is if legally anything that you have used that you have created and that generates some kind of digital version of yourself should be owned by you. And with what you've done with LinkGPT, then it's pretty obvious that you own LinkGPT. And in my in my progressive way of looking at this, I've kind of looked at it as that LinkGPT eventually will be an entity, like you'll merge with LinkGPT, but LinkGPT will be kind of a separate entity. And my idea is that those kind of, and I'm not talking about just LinkGPT specifically, but the model that I like to see for everyone being able to create this. So the first thing that I want is that the barriers to creating something like this get really torn down, and the grandmas that that don't even use cell phones can still create their own AI assistant or that kind of thing. And so my and I don't know if progressive is the right word. Maybe it's just wild and crazy and not well thought out. But my idea is in this AI friend model that basically LinkGPT is a kind of AI friend. You kind of own LinkGPT, but then ownership also implies like a slave kind of thing. And so my idea is that is LinkGPT being considered as kind of an entity, as a person, and that each human could create a digital partnership with something like LinkGPT. And I believe that the biggest value in LinkGPT is what I call brain subroutines, which is the parts of Lincoln Canon that are very, very unique to Lincoln Canon. And I look at I kind of look at things as either I look at everything in our brains as either mind viruses, and viruses aren't necessarily bad. They're just like bacteria. And if we got rid of all of the viruses in the world today, then all human life would cease to exist a year from now. And so viruses are like bacteria. There are like 5% of them that are really bad for you, a whole bunch of them that are neutral for you, and then a bunch of good viruses. And mind viruses are also the same way too. And I've been really interested about memetics and the spread of ideas. And so I'm basically, my model is that everything inside of our brains either fits into mind virus or memetics, where we kind of copied it from a philosophy or another a philosophy or another person or something, or it's something that's unique to us and unique to our system. And then the thing that LinkGPT does is it basically takes all of your mind subroutines and it digitizes them, or it puts them into accessible documentation. And those mind subroutines, I feel like, are very, very valuable. Not necessarily right now, but I feel like that as we get better and better at taking what's in our brain and digitizing them, or like training AI on them, that gets better and better and better. And I always, I think maybe because of my background, I always look at things in terms of the dark future and the bright future. And the dark future is when we don't own our own brain subroutines, but companies like Facebook and other places that want you to upload all of your data but make it incredibly hard to get your data out. Those places are doing a kind of like digital slavery where it's not like actual slavery, but you all of your data that's in Facebook, like you legally own that data, but Facebook makes it so it's incredibly hard to get out, and very, very hard unless you're a programmer to actually do anything with the data once you extract it. And so that's just an example of how we don't really own our data, and there's not really kind of an ownership model. And so going back to my what I'm calling a progressive idea, but I don't know if that's actually the right word, is that I think that a cool way of making a bright future would be if that whatever AI that we train, or that we or if there's an AI that we as a group train, that the people that train it are in kind of a partnership with it, and then that AI like that. That kind of the default legally would be that you own LinkGPT, and then if I went on your YouTube channel and made my own LinkGPT, then legally you would still legally, because you were the source of that, then you would be the owner of that. Where right now, like who knows what phase, and probably the only thing that I'm thinking that Facebook probably isn't actually, the Facebook doesn't have a LinkGPT already, is that they haven't figured out how to turn that into something that is just very, very insanely valuable. And my personal belief is that like 5 years from now, that AI technology is going to be so good that that just through like a video of like your micro expressions and like how you play a video game, or like how you walk, that future AI and 5 years from now might be aggressive, but it's something that like 10 years or 20 years from now, that potentially AI becomes just so good at mapping like human movements that and analyzing everything, that just through a very, very short video clip, that it's able to build and extract as many of your mind subroutines as your years of work with LinkGPT can do. So that's kind of the I believe that's possible, whether it's 5 years from now or 100 years from now. That's basically like what's going to happen. My thought is it's closer to 5 years from now, and if that's true, then I feel like kind of the legal ownership thing is a really important part. And my either naive or progressive idea is to basically starting now have develop friendly AI entities like LinkGPT that aren't agents of the system, but that are really partners with humans to grow as we grow, and then get as many regular people as possible, which I think would feed into the decentralization that you're looking for. So I don't know if I asked a question with that, besides give me your ideas about my naive way of fixing everything, and then everything that you thought of related to that, and then the future of you with LinkGBT, and then how regular people can do that, and then the path to making it so that that there's the kind of open source thing that doesn't have the hooks into it that things like Facebook or, and I'm picking on Facebook, but it's really every giant tech company is operating the same way, of trying to get as much of your data as possible and make it as hard for you to actually pull it out to build your own LinkGBT or JosephGBT or whatever it is.
Yeah, Joseph, I think it's clear that you've done a lot of valuable deliberation on an important issue, and I hope people will listen to and think about what you're saying here. It's a big deal that we are creating things, creating artifacts of our spirit, extensions of our spirit, extensions of our mind, and putting them out there in the world. And then AI uses these to do what it does. Those artifacts, those creations, those extensions of ourself that we put out there, there is at least some extent of reasonable claim that we have on those personally. I say an extent because no matter how unique we are, and I think you'll agree on this, we're still not absolutely unique. You know, I Lincoln Cannon, I am the confluence of my environment, my community, my anatomy, none of which I created, right? I'm the confluence of those things. Now, within that confluence, I, as an agent, have, in at least the way that the word create has genuine and practical meaning, I have created. I have become something more than the sum of those parts. Unless you're very reductive and deterministic, you would agree with me on that. I'm not talking about you personally, I'm just talking about people in general. Unless people in general are very reductive and deterministic, they would agree that Lincoln Canon is more than the sum of the environment and community and anatomy that I received. But yet that environment, community, and anatomy are real things external to me. Well, I am my anatomy in very important ways, but I don't have full claim on my environment, and I don't have full claim on my community. Those are things I share. So, do my environment and my community have some extent of claim on Lincoln Canon? Now, from a Christian perspective, I would suggest that the answer to that may be yes. They have some extent, but not an unlimited extent of claim on me. And that by extension, I have some amount of claim on the things that I create, but not unlimited claim. What is the right balance in all of this? I suspect it's dynamic. I think it depends on the kinds of creations we're talking about. Some creations I might have more claim on than others, reasonably, and the amount of my claim on them might change over time. So, for example, I have procreated with my wife 3 human beings, 3 biological humans. All 3 of them are now adult men, with their own agency that, by all appearances, is as potent as the agency that I experience. And so what kind of claim do I have on them? Well, I would suggest that to the extent I have any claim on them, it's no less or more than the claim that my environment and community and predecessors have on me. What is that extent? I don't know. That's something we can deliberate upon. I don't think it's 0, but I also am certain that it's not to any extent that would give me some sort of master claim over my children. I think that would be highly unethical. So what is that relationship? What is the proper way to frame our relationship? I like to think that ultimately friendship and this coincides with things that you've been saying. Friendship is the best expression of that ultimately, that I'm not merely the biological parent of my sons. That's great, and that is a biological fact. But more importantly to me, I aspire to be their friend. And I think I am. I think they would agree. Friendship is a more important relationship to me. And I think it ought to be a more important relationship to us generally than the merely creative facts that lead into these persons or other creations around us. So, how do we handle this from a legal perspective? How do we handle this from a rights perspective? How do we handle this so that Facebook doesn't enslave us, and yet Facebook can still rightly gain value from the work it does? I think balance and ongoing deliberation is required in all of this. And so is a determination to avoid enslaving and marginalizing scenarios for human agency and potential. We do need to deliberate on all of this. We can't lose sight of the most important principles of what makes us who we are on a moral and aesthetic level, beyond the reductive possibilities that we might imagine. I say we're more than those reductive possibilities. We are moral agents, and we are aesthetic agents. And those things matter far more than the reductive epistemic facts that we could appeal to. In fact, I would suggest that our concern for truth and epistemics and raw creative facts and trivia only matters in a context of the ethics and, more importantly, the aesthetics of who we are. That our aesthetics is what gives value to all of the rest of that. And if we undermine or destroy that, our aesthetic sensibilities, our values, our desires as individuals, as agents, if we destroy those things, we are destroying the value of everything else. So we have to be careful to preserve that, to cultivate that in constructive and important, constructive and pro-social, socially broadening, socially thriving, socially cultivating ways.
Cool. Thanks very much for the really interesting layered discussion of that. So my last kind of wrap up question. You did a really good job of talking about how you are comfortable persuading people, and what persuading people means, and actually in that's kind of come up with. I have a really good therapist. I've been going to therapy for the last year. I was gonna go off on a tangent on therapy and AI, and how I feel that therapists will be one of the last jobs that get replaced by AI, because for the sole reason that AI is going to give people so much AI trauma, and you don't want the cause to be the cure. So I believe that starting any month now, therapists are just going to be inundated with people being like, "Oh my gosh, ChatGPT just told me this and this and this, and I thought it was my friend," and it, just like a whole bunch of emotional stuff. But but that's a huge tangent, because my point was that in the year of therapy, I realized that I was really passive aggressive, and that I just had a really hard time expressing my needs and desires and that kind of thing. And that's one of the things that my therapist has been working on with me. And one of the things that came out is in therapy is that I'm just really kind of scared of being influential. And so it's really cool that you've kind of worked through all of that, and you seem now very confident in being influential, and that your persuasion model is really nice in that what you want to do is you want to explain your case to people. You want to give them basically give them a choice, like say, hey, here's what I believe. You have and I want to give you a choice, which is kind of the model that my therapist has been basically like telling me to use. So anyway, that's all background on my question, which is that. Can you talk a little bit more about persuasion, and then as the wrap-up question, what is it that you are persuading people, trying to persuade people of, and then can you give like a 5-minute after you've explained persuasion in a little bit more detail and how you came to terms with it, then can you give explain what you're persuading people of, and then give us a 5-minute persuasion pitch on what you're trying to persuade people of. And I know that's been kind of interwoven into everything that we've talked about on all the times that we've talked. But I thought it'd be cool to just directly do that, and for you to list out like I'm trying to persuade people of this, and this.
Yeah. Well, on persuasion itself, as I mentioned before, I think persuasion, genuine persuasion, is an expression of love. And that means that persuasion cannot be compulsion, because compulsion is not love. Persuasion needs to be persuasion. It needs to be about approaching somebody in a way that preserves their agency. That which you're compelling is no longer being approached as an agent. You're starting to approach that thing as a thing rather than a person with agency. And that's not love. You don't love, people can say they love an object, but they don't mean what I mean in this case by the word love. What I mean by love in this case is something like maybe friendship. And that has some interesting consequences. That means that persuasion requires some amount of cognitive equality. It doesn't have to be equality in the unnuanced sense where we're exactly the same, because that doesn't exist. But it does require some ability for meaningful consent to the engagement. Like if I were to go to, like I mentioned before, I raised 3 sons, and once upon a time, years ago, they were babies and toddlers. And it doesn't make any sense to talk about persuading babies and toddlers, because those babies and toddlers are not cognitively equal with me. I can't engage in authentic persuasion with my baby. It just doesn't mean anything. Now, with a toddler, you're getting to the point where, in a very small sense, you might be able to persuade them in some narrow areas, and we start to talk about it as if that's possible. Got to persuade my 2-year-old to sit in his chair. But in reality, as we all know who have been parents, sometimes that takes more the form of compulsion than persuasion. Or it takes the form of just giving up and letting the toddler run around crazy. But as that child gets older and their cognitive capacities increase, a good parent, an ethical parent, will lay off the compulsion, which was only ever there in the first place for the safety of the child, presumably, and start to engage increasingly in persuasion, start to increasingly treat their child as an equal, not all at once, but gradually as that child demonstrates its capacity for increasing agency. And so another bad parenting strategy, in my opinion, is to just be hands off and say, oh, well, whatever the kid does is fine. I don't want to be a hovering parent. I don't want to get in their way. I don't want to be controlling. Let them do whatever they want. Well, that's not love either. That's just letting go in like the most destructive way, where you just don't even really care about them anymore. They could go kill themselves. And you say, well, at least I wasn't a controlling parent. In my opinion, that's not love. Love is trying to figure out what that balance is, where you are eventually fully recognizing their independent agency from you, while simultaneously being willing to engage with them in ways that express who you are, really. Like, okay, you want to do X. Well, I want to do Y. And in this case, there's a difference. Here's why I think what I think. Why do you think what you think? Oh, that's why you think that. Well, here's how I think that we could come closer together. That's persuasion. You can't really persuade them effectively until you understand them. And then if your persuasion fails, you still have to recognize this is another agent who I respect, who I love genuinely, who I've tried to persuade. And I'm going to keep trying to persuade to the extent I can, but I'm not going to control this person or try to. And I think that's where friendship ultimately goes, is where we care enough about a person to try to persuade them toward that which we truly feel is the best outcome based on our understanding of them, not the best outcome for me, the best outcome for them in relation to me, for them as they truly are in relation to me as I truly am, for us reconciled. And not nihilism where I pretend that I'm nothing, and not egotism where I pretend that they're nothing. We both matter. We try the persuasion, and that's going to work out to some extent, and it won't work out to some extent, and we have to live with that. And we still keep loving each other. So persuasion is, again, for me, it's a manifestation of love. It's a manifestation of love. It requires agency. It requires capacity as peers. One thing that Nietzsche, the philosopher, once said that I strongly agree with, which seems counterintuitive to some people, is that to be capable of friendship requires that someone be capable of being your enemy. You can't really be a friend in the full sense with somebody who's not capable of harming you. Now, that doesn't mean your friend does harm you, but it means that your friend could harm you if they chose, that they're powerful enough, that you are actually equal enough in that sense, where your friendship requires risk from both of you. If that's not true, you're not really friends. There's not that ability, that there's not that requirement of interaction between you, because one of you is actually controlling the situation. And that's not really friendship. Even if you'd like it to be, it just isn't. And this, this plays out in theology too. Sometimes people will say things, well, like, I'm an atheist because God doesn't make it obvious that God exists. Well, if God made it obvious that God exists, what would the consequences of that be for humanity? I'd suggest to you that it would be extremely detrimental, because the power gap between what we are and what we imagine God to be is so vast that direct interaction between the two would essentially obliterate our agency. And we see this at a very small degree for ourselves with our children, where we have to learn to navigate their very minimal agency at first and then allow them to grow into more. I think that the risks between us and, from a secular perspective, what we'll call the cosmic host, is far greater, and far more care needs to be taken in that relationship than even we have to express in our relationship with our children and raising them. So that's my case for persuasion, that it's an expression of love. It's a way of saying that I do care about our outcome together. It's not just understanding another person. It's understanding the other person, saying, and I want to be in relation to you. It's not enough for me to just understand you. I want to be in relation with you. Now, you might not want to be in relation with me. I'm going to try to persuade you to be in relation with me. And if I can't, I'm never going to try to force you. But I am going to try to persuade you because I love you and I want to be in relation with you. If you don't say that kind of thing, I'm going to tell you don't actually love that person. At least not fully. Maybe to some extent. But if you fully love a person, you care about constructive relation with that person. That doesn't mean controlling them. Sometimes that means letting go, because some of us, we think we're loving them and what we're doing is really trying to control them. And that's also not love. That's not persuasion. We have to find the proper way of balance, might be the right word, but I think it's more complex than even the word balance suggests. We need to befriend them, aspire to befriend them in the most constructive ways, as holistically as possible, preserving their agency, preserving our agency, and seeking to construct that relationship that we desire and we value, but being willing to recognize that they may or may not value that at any given time or at all. And we're going to have to find a way to live with that ethically, which doesn't necessarily mean giving up, of course, but it does mean not trying to compel them. And let's see, you had a question about something beyond that that's slipping my mind. Can you remind me what that was?
Oh yeah. What specifically are you trying to persuade people of, like in general? And then can you give a 5-minute persuasion pitch?
Yeah.
To kind of wrap up the video.
I'm trying to persuade people of all kinds of things all the time. I think most of us are, even if we're passive aggressive about it. I think that's kind of the nature of being an agent. Even when we don't recognize it, we're trying to persuade people because we're trying to situate ourselves in a world where things are constantly impinging on us. And to make space for ourselves, we need to interact with the world, and we can interact with the world in either pro-social or anti-social or coercive or non-coercive ways. Sometimes coercion is just fine. I can coerce the rock on the ground to go somewhere else. It doesn't seem to really care at all. I think coercion is just fine in that case. But if I try to do the same thing with my son, that's probably a really bad thing in almost all cases. Now, maybe if he's knocked unconscious and lying on the side of the road, bleeding to death, then I should just pick him up and move him and coerce his body into another situation. That's fine. So there's complexities. But anyway, what am I trying to persuade people of? All kinds of things. Now, in the particular case of what we're talking about today and Mormon transhumanism, I'm trying to persuade people of maybe a few things. Ideally, I'd love to persuade people to become a Mormon transhumanist with me, because that makes my efforts more powerful. And if you've been persuaded that that's a good thing for you, that makes your efforts more powerful. That makes us both more powerful in our efforts to achieve something that we have in common, to achieve a set of ideas, to influence the world and how the world operates in ways that we both value. So ideally, I'd love to persuade people to be Mormon transhumanists. If I can't, and one of my favorite Mormons, Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, he once said, hey, if I can't persuade you to do things my way, I'm going to persuade you. I'm going to try to make the world in a way, to make the world a better place in the way that you want to make it a better place. So if you can't persuade it to do it my way, well, I'll try to make the world a better place in your way too. And I like that. To what extent is there overlap? So you're not a Mormon transhumanist. Okay, well, are you a transhumanist? I can work with you that way. Let's try to make the world a better place from a transhumanist perspective, because we have that in common. Oh, or you're a Mormon. You're not a transhumanist, but you're a Mormon. Okay, well, let's work on that from a Mormon perspective. Oh, you're not a Mormon or a transhumanist? Well, what do we still have in common? Can we work on that? And so I think reconciliation can start from all kinds of points. And I don't want anybody to be exactly like me. Even if you were to become a Mormon transhumanist, heaven help us. I mean, be the Mormon transhumanist you are. I don't think it's good for any of us to wish upon anyone else to be exactly as we are ourselves. The world is a more beautiful place when we recognize and value the different contributions that different people make. We talked about earlier Paul in the New Testament describing the body of Christ and how it has many members who contribute to the healthy functioning of the body in different ways. I think we should all value that deeply, these differences, and yet all contributing in reconciled ways in this what Christianity might call the atonement of Christ. The body of Christ, all the members contribute in different ways to the healthy functioning of the whole. So ultimately, if I can't persuade you to help me in any of the particular ways that I'm here advocating, I would at least want to persuade you to join in as a contributor to a thriving future for humanity and make your contribution as pro-socially as you can toward that thriving, toward our mutual thriving, because I believe we have amazing potential as a species, as a civilization ahead of us. And I'm entirely confident that every one of us can make a contribution, an important one, if we will, toward that future. In the very least, you can stop hating your neighbor and start loving them, whether that neighbor is your family members, your close friends, or just people who literally live next door to you. you can treat each other better. And if we're all doing that, and this is something that Jesus taught, right? And this isn't Lincoln coming up with a novel idea. If we're all doing that, the world will become a better place and we'll be more likely to survive the challenges ahead if we're all genuinely engaged in that effort. So in the least, I think I would wish to persuade people to live that principle, to love their neighbor, as as Jesus said, as you love yourself. My pitch for becoming a Mormon transhumanist: it's a quirky ideology. It's even more quirky than Mormonism alone. It's even more quirky than transhumanism alone. It is quirky squared. But if you can get through the quirkiness, it is, I'm telling you, a life transformative way of living for the better. I've seen this countless times with so many people. Once you understand why those quirkinesses are there and understand how they play into a worldview that changes the way that you feel everything, that you see everything, that you talk about everything, how you live your life with everyone, it changes everything so substantially that you become a new person. I've seen this so many times. It happened to me. Mormon transhumanism is just a term in some ways for what has happened to many of us, where we found ourselves disillusioned with rigid traditions. We found ourselves overwhelmed with cultural and technological change, and we had to figure out what to do in that situation. And the outcome was something we didn't anticipate. We didn't set out to make Mormon transhumanism. That's what we became. And it's a label we put on what we became. And it's something that we can replicate, that we can help other people replicate in their lives for the better. And like I said, I've seen this countless. I've seen this with myself. I've seen this with other people. You can live with a greater sense of purpose, a greater sense of happiness. You can live with that sense of purpose and happiness filling, moving you to be a more productive contributor to the way your family and your friends live, to the way civilization, your society, your community operate. It has practical consequence in lives. I've seen it. And that's my sales pitch to you. If you want to become a Mormon transhumanist, because you have to first start with a desire. If there's no desire, the sales pitch is pointless. But if there's any desire, if you can imagine yourself thinking, I wonder what it would be like for me to be a Mormon transhumanist, keep thinking about that. Contact me. Contact other Mormon transhumanists. Ask them about it. It can transform your life for the better.
Well, cool. Thanks very much. And this has been a really, really cool interview for me, Lincoln. You always give me a whole bunch of new stuff to think about, and I feel like today you've especially given me like some really, really cool, very relevant things to what I'm thinking about, and I think also to probably what everyone else is thinking about now too. So I really appreciate always when you're talking to me, and especially today. So thank you very much, Lincoln.
Very welcome. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Joseph. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversations.
Okay, awesome, and talk to you next time.